So let's talk about Brad Pitt. This is our trending topic, and why are we talking about him? Well, his latest movie, Ad Astra, follows his character on a space mission to remedy a cosmic threat to all of human life, as well as to search for his missing father. He also was in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and gave a potentially Oscar-worthy or Oscar nomination-worthy performance there. He's getting Oscar buzz for both of these roles. Similarly, the actor has been dealing with some major life changes following his divorce, separation from his wife, Angelina Jolie. There's been some challenges in all of that with child rearing for the two of them. And so has had some personal challenges in his life. So in today's episode, we're going to discuss the psychological makeup of Brad Pitt, at least as we can understand it, including how his real life has impacted his approach to his role in Ad Astra, his life in the public eye, and his creative outlet in acting. So let's start with just your general take on Brad Pitt as a actor and human. What's your kind of, let's just kind of give a general, lay it out for me. How do you see this guy? How would you describe him? Again, we always say this, but we don't diagnose people on this show. That's not our job. And some of the stuff that we do is speculative because we have to take pieces of information that we get from different sources and put them together. But hopefully we can come to some good information about him. So Emma Kate, what's your opening take on him?
Truthfully, when I think of Brad Pitt, there's one word that just immediately jumps into mind, and it's charming. He just seems
say hot.
Well, I mean, but his appearance, his physical appearance, is absolutely part of the charm. I mean, he is an extremely attractive human, and the reality is he also just has this sort of air of confidence about him. And I recently watched a fantastic series called Between Two Ferns, which is terrible, but and he was on that with, is it Zach Galifianakis? Mm-hmm. And just watching him, and he was throwing some major curveballs in terms of just like the awkward questions that get asked, and he handles it. I mean, I know it's satire, but he just handles everything gracefully, or at least as gracefully as you would expect. So I just think he is charming, potentially off screen without actually knowing him, but then also on screen, he's nice to look at.
He's charming to look at. There's a lot of charm to look at.
I'm just being honest. I'll own that.
Six-pack of charm.
Jonathan?
Well, he's charming and hot. I think we've already established that. So I won't spend 30 minutes wiping up the drool as I think about Brad Pitt. You know, he is this synthesis of old school cool with some modern masculine kind of enhancements. Like he's a modern man in terms of sensitivity, kind of opening up about behind the curtain. He's not afraid to kind of own up to some flaws. He clearly has flaws, and I think he's been open about that. But he also has, at times, kind of that Steve McQueen sort of cool about him. And I think people sort of view that about him as well. And not so much maybe a mystery, although I kind of find him an enigma in some ways. I find his craft as an actor and the celebrity that he could be, there seems to be a tension. Like, I think he could be the biggest movie star in the world if he wanted to be. I really do. He's got the acting, he's got the charisma, but he chooses projects that really don't necessarily put him on that trajectory. Like working with Tarantino, working with some of the directors that he does, they're very artful projects. So there's something about him really finding a deeper connection with the craft of acting and performing versus celebrity superstardom. And yet, who was he with? Angelina Jolie. Like, I always sort of see these two sides of him that is fascinating, even if I can't pin him down. Mm-hmm. Although I would like to pin him down. Hey.
Oh boy,
you know
there it is. There it is. Yeah.
If you know what I'm saying.
Oh my gosh. Man Crush Monday here, apparently.
So, well, let's talk about that. It's almost impossible to read some piece on him, an interview, a sketch on his kind of career without there being a discussion of how good looking a man he is, how attractive he is. And that's inarguable. But what's interesting is he has seemed to want to distance himself from that. Right. And that's, and in fact, in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, there was a line that he allowed to be delivered about his looks, but it was really because it was a original line to Burt Reynolds, that Burt Reynolds had originally said it. What do you make of that? Of like, he doesn't really use or want to use his looks as a form of currency necessarily. And yet it is, but in terms of what roles he picks, how he is seen in the public eye, any thoughts about that aspect?
Yeah, I mean, that makes perfect sense because that seems to be kind of a common theme for a lot of attractive celebrities where, okay, so you get your start based on your looks, and then you get enough star power and influence to say, okay, I have enough money in the bank that I can start pursuing other passions, other creative projects that maybe people would judge me for, or that might be a total flop, and it doesn't necessarily matter as much to them personally, potentially, because the reality is when we think about attraction and your level of outward beauty, that's going to fade. And I think the higher approach is to say, okay, well, how can I prove my value and my worth without that piece? So how do I show the world who I am internally in that internal sense of value?
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be difficult. I mean, Brad and I, we both have the burden of just having God-given attraction.
I mean, yeah, you guys are just...
And people are always just sort of underestimating all the other talents and gifts that we have because like they are just blinded by our pure beauty.
So attractive.
They call me the Brad Pitt of Charlotte psychotherapy.
Asian psychotherapist. Yeah.
Exactly. I am the Brad Pitt of that.
Oh, yeah.
No, but I do think that he in a lot of ways, he can't help, his physicality to some degree, but he doesn't want to be defined by that, right? And if there's any place... if there's any field where someone's going to define you from a primarily shallow and exterior, it's going to be entertainment. I mean, so for him to really push back on that, and I would say we've talked previously about J-Lo, I think both of them have found a very smart way of utilizing their physical attraction to open up other doors where they can really showcase the full range of their talents and interests. So it's not that he's sort of like kind of ugling himself up, but he'll use it to do other projects where it's really about the acting, it's about the story, it's about what he wants to accomplish in the arts and entertainment industry.
Well, and I think, the age piece is a factor with that because if it wasn't for aging and not being the immediate go-to for the romantic lead in a movie, he's going to be potentially casted in other more complex or nuanced roles.
Mm-hmm. One other piece of him that is fascinating is he has really devoted his later life, not later like he's old, but the second half of his career to a lot of philanthropic efforts. He's been instrumental in some of the New Orleans rebuilding efforts. He's done a lot of charitable work, some of it very much below the radar that we find out. It's kind of like what we talked about with Keanu Reeves before, a lot of it below the radar, some of it that we're aware of. How do you see that fitting into your understanding of him in terms of the philanthropic or the charitable aspects of his life?
I mean, I guess I always think back to just celebrities in general. We act like we know them given we have so much exposure to these individuals with mass media at this point in time. But at the same time, they're people, they're humans, and everybody wants to feel connection. Everybody wants to have some sense of purpose, and it's more meaning driven. So, I mean, when you have all of your basic needs met, you could just sit there and be very materialistic and think about, oh, well, now I want to get a jet because I got my yacht. And it's like, no, this isn't how, well, I shouldn't say that. Some people want to live their life however they want to. Let's be real. But not that yachts or jets are bad, for the record. But we need to, or it's best and helpful to consider others. And when you give back to others, it does give you good things as well. It feels positive. It's a reciprocal sort of situation that maybe isn't as obvious to some.
I mean, I'd like to think that, or I'd speculate, there might be two kind of forces that inform more of that private, quiet philanthropy. I think one would be so many other aspects of his life is just out in the spotlight. So that's just one thing that he can claim for his own that he's not doing for regard or building his reputation in the public eye. But I think the other, if I'm not mistaken, I think he grew up in Springfield, Missouri. I think he kind of
did.
And in some ways that really feels like a lot of that Midwestern sensibility that I come across from folks that come from that area, that it's really, it's just this foundation of decency without showboating, which is ironic since Missouri is the show me state, that he would come from there and he wouldn't want people to know about all of his generous deeds. But I think there may be something to that.
Mm-hmm. One deeper part that I want to get to is he's been open about some mental health struggles. He's also been open about that he was a very regular marijuana user and a heavy drinker, at least at times of his life, to the point where after his divorce, he went to AA. He put himself on kind of a no drinking plan. He's been pretty forthcoming about the substance struggles that he's had. I want to go to Jonathan first about this and ask you, what's your take on that for him, and also just AA as an approach and ways of kind of managing that aspect of struggle?
Well, I mean, Brad Pitt wouldn't be the first person or first guy that would turn to alcohol and substances to self-medicate, to deal with stressors, or just simply something that may have started out as a benign indulgence really became more problematic the more you turn to it as a way to cope and react or escape life. And I think that he's talked about AA, he's talked about therapy, and I think for a lot of people, AA, for whatever reason, can have less of a social stigma, and it can be more acceptable for people to have drinking problems. Almost everybody knows somebody that's had a drinking problem, and AA, 12 Steps, has been around for so long that might require maybe a little less, and I don't want this to sound negative, but take a little less courage or humility because it's normalized a little bit more than a man going and talking to a therapist and really having to get past that pride and ego about seeking someone for help, or just even knowing how to talk to another person on such a personal and sensitive area. And that's really where I would see a lot of his growth and what he's really providing a positive role model for older men and just for America is really destigmatizing. Like, Brad Pitt has it all, you could argue in a general sense, but he recognizes that he needed help. He let things get out of hand and control in his life, or he didn't know how to cope. And it's never too late to really turn around your life and improve yourself.
Yeah, and I think to kind of piggyback off what you said, the reality is it's so hard, most likely, to trust anyone in Hollywood. And so then for him to go to, the AA groups and be vulnerable and talk about his life difficulties with others, potentially, it is extremely courageous. And he is doing a lot of great work to combat some of those classic masculine stereotypes that men, need to suck it up. You don't need to talk about those things, pull yourself up from your bootstraps. When the reality is, it's like, oh, okay, so somebody is having this problem. They're struggling. And sometimes it's very jarring for family members where maybe a male does fit that sort of classic masculine perspective, but you have to take time to recognize that we are all human, and celebrities are no different than us. And he is doing something that I think is going to have a trickle effect because he is more powerful, from my perspective, than other celebrities that we've talked about. But he is doing something very subtle but powerful.
And I will say that I really admire the model that he's taken because there is a lot of differing opinions about AA and its effectiveness, but the limited research that is out there that most people agree upon suggests that AA in conjunction with talk therapy together really kind of can bring out the best in both of those platforms. So a lot of times there can be a lot of tension between the mental health community and the recovery community and how they sort of frame life struggles or even substance-related struggles. But even with the folks that I work with, those that are committed to AA but also seek out mental health treatment because they recognize that it's more than just drinking, that's really what they're struggling with, they tend to have better outcomes.
And this last question about Brad Pitt, I'm slightly hesitant to ask, but I want to ask it for a reason, and that is there's been enough press reports that in the process of this divorce and separation that there has been a rift with at least one, maybe more of his kids and him, and we don't know the inner workings of that family. We don't know their relationships as they stand now. We'll say all that up front. But what I would want to ask is, if that were true, and there's a continued rift that needs to be mended, Emma Kate, if you had a parent that was in that situation, what would you recommend to them as a way of kind of mending a relationship that had been hurt with a child or a teenager or a young adult kid?
Truthfully, that's a really hard question because it depends so much on the context of what happened. So oftentimes when there are relationship issues, you have to kind of dissect what was the series of events prior to even that one moment that was, quote unquote, the straw that broke the camel's back, because oftentimes it's been an accumulation of a variety of things where the child maybe didn't feel heard, didn't feel understood, parents maybe felt frustrated, and frequently, one of the things that I will try to dig into is where are parent expectations and are they matched to the actual needs and abilities of the child as a good starting point. Because when trust is broken, it takes a really long time to repair. And sometimes, and I know this is going to be a little out there, but the reality is there are situations where maybe the kid is actually making a better healthy choice because their parents are really unhealthy, toxic humans. And that's not probably a widely held belief by everyone. But the reality is it is okay to set boundaries. And sometimes children kind of have a more intuitive feel for that at a younger age. And they have to figure out how to manage the conflicts in the home until they can get out of there.
Yeah, it's definitely a juggling act. I think I read somewhere the headlines was with Maddox. I think his son that just recently went off to college, and a lot of times as children grow up, there is a shift in terms of the power imbalance, and so whether or not Brad Pitt's son Maddox feels that his dad was neglectful, whether there was other areas of conflict, it's really about, in a lot of ways, Brad communicating an openness and desire to both repair a relationship as well as have an ongoing relationship, but showing respect and acceptance for the child's wishes and the timing that the kid needs to make that decision. Because that's really, the more a parent continues to try to control the direction and narrative, the more the kid's going to push back. And so that oftentimes is really that's really difficult for a lot of fathers. It really is for a lot of parents, is to that process of letting go and letting your child direct the timing and the steps, because the more you push, the more they pull away.
Yeah, and that is, there's kind of three approaches with parenting. You can enforce something, and you're going to get a blow up most likely, so it's typically better to provide choice where you can. You can temporarily drop an expectation, and this is where I spend a lot of time with my families because they assume, oh, well, by me, letting go of this expectation, that's giving the kid too much power. But it's actually you as parent making a conscious choice choice to say, I am at the moment dropping this expectation. It's not forever. And then the third option is you can try to help it or problem solve with them. And typically you need to do that at an appropriate time and make sure everyone's calm. But so there are things that can be done. But it is a process.
Well, good conversation about Brad Pitt. We hope you check out his movies Ad Astra and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And our final segment is something that we call Doctor's Orders. These are things that we're personally enjoying in pop culture that we want to recommend to you. Emma Kate.
So I have, over the last year or so, really gotten into meditation. And one of my favorite apps that I want to make sure people know about is called Insight Timer. So this app is fantastic in the sense that it gives you access to over thousands of free meditations. And I'll be honest and say that the navigation is a little awkward to get used to for it. But once you do, it's great. The premium version is $5 a month, and you can get access to 10-day courses, 30-day courses on a huge variety of topics. You can download things offline. So I would highly recommend this app.
And Jonathan.
Two quick recommendations. One, it is the 50th anniversary of the Beatles' Abbey Road, and they have re-released a deluxe edition, remastered, and the sound is ridiculous. The harmonies really stand out. Every aspect of the musical giftedness of the group is there. It sounds so crisp. It's wonderful. I highly recommend you check that out. And I've been meaning to check this out, but finally the Emmys just said, Jonathan, you need to take the dive. So I have started watching Fleabag, the Amazon Prime hit global phenomenon starring Phoebe Waller-Bridge. And let me tell you, this is my type of show. It is scathing. It is dark. It is vulgar. It's got depth. I mean, that is my cup of tea. So Fleabag season 1 and 2, it just cleaned up at the Emmys.
Speaking of vulgar, right?
Yes.
Needs to clean up. Well, I'm going to recommend an album by the Black Keys called Let's Rock. I just saw them in concert last night in Nashville, and they were outstanding. This album, which I've been listening to over and over again, is one of my favorites of the year. And the reference, by the way, is very dark. It's an electric chair on the album cover, and it is apparently a reference to when the state of Tennessee, because they're a Nashville-based band, when the state of Tennessee started up with executions again. The first person that they had in the for the execution, they asked him for his comments or what he wanted to say, and he said, "Let's rock." So pretty dark title for the album, but a really brilliant and great, straightforward rock and roll album. Good stuff. And that's going to do it for this edition of the Shrink Tank Podcast. For Emma Kate Wright, Jonathan Hedderly in Charlotte, I'm Dave Verhagen in Nashville. We want you to tell all your friends about us and make it a great week.